Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to this reflections video, Sunday, the 27th of July 2025. Today, I would like to continue to discuss with you something from this wonderful book, Morality in the Quran, by Shaykh Muhammad Abdullah Draz, who was a great scholar of the past century. That's the early 20th century. Today, we're going to discuss something about the moral duties of a human being and a Muslim. This is on page 15 of the book. Delimitation and grading of duties. Every individual is a synthesis of relationships, including the personal, familial, social, human, and divine. This system of elements is interdependent, tightly integrated, and subject to evolution and to progress, so that no element can be neglected without damaging the admirable proportion in which the individual is created. The vast majority of people define duty toward and within these relationships according to a minimum standard. So, I mean, that's got quite a lot in there already. In other words, each one of us, we have different kinds of relationships. We have relationships on a personal level with people that we know, who are like friends, familial relationships. We have relationships with people that become romantic partners. We have social relationships with other people within the community. And these are just the human relationships. And then we also have relationships with the divine and with the natural order of things. Now, each of these contains benefits and responsibilities. And if we neglect any of those elements, then we or the other person or the system ends up suffering. So it's important to have our responsibilities in balance and not to neglect them. This is basically what the Sheikh is saying here. And he said that the vast majority of people define duty toward and within these relationships according to a minimum standard. So most people will understand that there's at least certain basic standards that we should have in how we treat other people. Now, what they are, what they understand by that will vary from one individual to another, depending upon which culture, religion, what background they are coming from. But everybody will understand something by that. But the Sheikh continues and says, yet beyond this minimum, there remains creative, constructive virtue, a field of activity which is so vast, it comprises endless degrees, all possible and practicable. Those with higher capacities and a sense of morality will tend to equate goodness with duty, rendering minimum standards unacceptable for leading a fulfilling life. What he's saying here is that people who understand the importance of these moral standards, the importance of how we treat people, the importance this then has for the kind of society that we will all end up living in, and whether that will be beneficial towards us and to our families, and what happens if we don't maintain standards. They will not see these minimum standards as being anything like enough. And that's why they are the minimum standards. But those that are capable of doing more should do more. And those who have the capacity and understanding, they will certainly promote this idea and try to live up to it themselves. This high degree of moral sense is not to be expected of everyone. Rather, each individual must undertake a combination of duties that ensures the maintenance of the diverse relationships of which they are part. Such contribution serves not only to elevate the subjects of duty, but also to preserve the bearer himself. Thus, we must partake in all these values before we choose to specialize in one or several or more than others. So this is basically what I was just commenting there, that not everybody's going to be up to the same standard on this. And we can't expect that everybody will be, because everybody has different abilities, capacities, understanding. But those of us who can understand should strive to do better and do them as best we can. But that will vary according to each individual. It will also vary according to the roles people have within society. So, for instance, if someone is a chaplain or an imam, or someone in a, who's a CEO of a, or what do you call them, like a principal at a school or a college or something, or someone who is a counselor, or anybody in sort of a position of responsibility like that, they will be expected to uphold higher standards than other people because they are in a position of responsibility. If you are not in a position of that, let's say you were just, I was going to say, if you're just a welder. Well, actually, if you're just a welder, you have tremendous responsibility, because if you don't do your job properly, then the vehicle of which you are welding the parts together could have an accident. So actually, all of us should take jobs seriously, because no matter how, like, within the general society, how lowly some jobs seem, they actually do have importance. Even as simple as a cleaner, if a person doesn't do their cleaning job properly, then diseases could spread. Those diseases could cause people to get seriously ill, maybe even die. So actually, cleaners are really, really important, and we should have utmost respect for people in that role. But society generally doesn't. We look towards people who have a lot of money or have a very fancy sounding position that is hierarchically elevated within society. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they really are more important than other people who are doing jobs that are not given the same kind of emphasis. Duty only occupies a certain part of what is good living space for us to satisfy other needs. So duty only occupies a certain part of what is good leaving space for us to satisfy other needs. Should have been a comma there. So it's like if we focus too much on duties and we overburden ourselves with duties, then we will not have time to do anything else. That will exhaust people, and they will not be able to live fulfilling lives. So there clearly needs to be a balance here. The realm of good has mandatory minimums as well as more meritorious and open increments. The intelligence and conditions of every individual will determine its tendencies in this regard. Recognition of this subjectivity means that strict duty towards others is largely defined and accomplished in the negative sense, i.e., not to violate others. People are therefore entitled to our justice, but not to our charity. From this perspective, selfishness becomes enshrined in the law. This is what tends to happen in a lot of societies, because what tends to happen is we are advised what not to do. Not necessarily what to do, but what not to do. And what not to do, that usually becomes illegal or very taboo or culturally frowned upon within a society. So there are consequences, negative consequences for if you do those things. But all that does is enable a kind of selfishness. People are doing that for their own selfish, that they don't get into trouble. But that's not the ideal. That's actually quite far from the ideal. The Sheikh continues and says, to verify this, sorry, verify, to rectify this, Islam seeks to present people with two alternatives on a continuous spectrum, from obligatory good to the recommended good. The obligatory good allows for suitable participation in that which is meritorious, while the recommended good exhorts us to ever higher refinements of our contributions. So, in other words, certain things are obliged upon us that we really should do unless we've got a very, very good excuse not to. And then there are other things which are highly recommended, but if we don't do them, it's not seen as, there's any shortcoming really on our part. But if we have the mentality that we should be trying to do the things that are recommended as far as we're able, then that encourages us to keep doing better. So we'll keep improving. Above strict obligation, it places the virtue of tolerance and generosity. As examples, the Quran states, if a debtor cannot repay their debt, more time must be given, but debt forgiveness is recommended. So in this example, if somebody can't pay their debt, then you can give them more time in order to pay their debt. However, the Quran recommends if you are able, then it's better to forgive them their debt, and there's more barakah in that. There's more blessings. But that doesn't mean we have to. It just means if you're able and you want to do that. So the Quran giving two options in this case. It is a right to demand justice. So asking for your money back if you've loaned it to someone, for them to return it, this is a case of justice. But on the other hand, if you forgive them, this is a case of generosity and compassion and mercy. Both of these are important. The justice comes first because you need to have the basic justice. But at the same time, if you can do more than demand justice and be kind and merciful, Allah loves this more. It also creates a better society because if people have that quality within a society, you tend to get a lot more kind and generous people. Then it just makes it very nice for everybody to live in. It's also better for everybody's souls. And that's why the Quran gives these two options, but recommends the latter, but doesn't demand it. To perform one's duty well is good, but to do good spontaneously is praiseworthy with God. The hierarchy of values in the Quran is not limited to an elaboration of positive as well as negative values. It also elaborates a non-value between the value and anti-value, a non-prescribed between the prescribed and the proscribed. Prescribed acts are described as primary duties, then other obligations, and then more meritorious acts. Proscribed acts are presented as unforgivable, then bad, then serious or pardonable. So you have things which are advised for us to do, which we are very highly encouraged to do. These are prescribed acts, prescribed duties. And you have proscribed. Proscribed is the opposite of prescribed. So these are things which we really shouldn't do, but they vary, each of these categories. So the things that we are called to doing are they are themselves divided between things which are primary duties, which really we should do unless we have no excuse, unless, unless we have a good excuse. Then other obligations. So then there's other things that if we can do them, we really should do them. But if we can't, it's not seen as so serious. And then there's other things which are meritorious, which are really beneficial if we can do, but it's up to us. If we can, it's just more blessings, but there's no pressure or anything to do them. Similarly, with the bad things, they are also split into different categories. You've got things which are presented as unforgivable. Of course, ultimately, if you really make tawbah, if you really ask God for forgiveness, even the unforgivable sins in Islam are actually forgivable. But they are really, really serious, which is why they are described in that way. And then you have bad, and then you have things which are regarded as serious or pardonable, but they're not in the same category. So the Sheikh is saying that non-prescribed acts are permissible and tolerated. So the things which are not forbidden, they are allowed and tolerated even if they're disliked. Permissible acts are morally neutral, i.e. choosing between two or more equally lawful alternatives. Allowances are subject to spatial and temporal determinations. The rule, however, is not subject to the situation. Rather, we must adjust to situations that are beyond our control without altering the integrity of the rule. What this means is how we actually apply these things will vary according to the times and circumstances in which we find ourselves and in which the society finds itself. So we're not expected to do everything exactly the same way as we did 100 years ago or 200 years ago or 1,000 years ago. And we're not expected to do things exactly the same way in Turkey as we would in Saudi Arabia or in the United Kingdom. But the same principles should apply. The same rules should be there behind it all. But how we actually apply and interpret them will vary according to the times and circumstances, according to the local culture, the customs, the situation. And that is not about changing the integrity of the rule. That's about understanding and ensuring we apply these ideas, these rules, these principles appropriately within any given situation. The Sheikh then finishes this paragraph with saying, when obstacles become insurmountable, obligations give way to necessity. The aim of gentleness of this legislation is therefore not to diminish, but to rationalize effort. Very, very important point here. When obstacles become insurmountable, this means if it becomes literally impossible in order to perform an action, no matter how highly recommended that action is, if it becomes really impossible for you to do it, then the system gives way to necessity. What can you do in that situation? This shows a gentleness within Islam and within our jurisprudence, that it doesn't encourage us to put ourselves in impossible situations and make things too difficult for ourselves. Instead, rationality is encouraged. So we've been given the principles, we've been given the laws that they were given, 1400 years ago, and the basic principles that we're supposed to follow. We've given the example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and how he did it that time. Since then, we've also had other examples of people who have implemented these things at various different times. And they vary. Even they vary. And we are supposed to use everything that we know and the best of our reason to apply this in the way that is going to work out for the best of everyone. And that is one of the actual very beautiful things about Islam. So there needs to be an understanding that we have moral duties, we have moral obligations towards our society. Islam then takes it one step further and says we should do more than just the basics. We should be kind and compassionate and also tolerate people, at the minimum, tolerate people who have different ways of going about things or who don't follow the code exactly as we would expect them to. But then we should go beyond that and be kind and compassionate. Actually, tolerance doesn't go far enough, but we are expected to do that as far as we're able. But if we're in situations get to the point where we cannot follow the norms that we would follow, also Islam is forgiving. We're not expected to do what is beyond our capacity to do. And that latter principle, that actually applies to all of jurisprudence. And it is very sane and reasonable. Often forgotten, unfortunately. It would get us out of a lot of problems if people understood this better. Anyway, this is the book I was reading, Morality in the Quran by Shaykh Muhammad Abdullah Draz. If you could get yourself a copy, that would be really good for you as well. Very useful book. The scholar lived between 1894 and 1958 and is Al-Azhar's trained. So this is very mainstream. I hope you found that useful. Also, if you find these videos useful, I have set up a Buy Me a Coffee. So if you can, if you can contribute £5 or £10 a month, that will help me to be able to improve my content and to be able to produce more and to be able to focus on this a lot more than I am at the moment, as well as continue to produce these videos and posts. So please, if you're in a position to do that, please consider doing that. And the link is on my profile. Until next time, I wish you all have a very good evening if you're in the UK and wherever you are. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings of God be with you all. Have a good week.